Hey, you guys, it's time to remap our minds. We can create a life we design. This episode is a special episode because, as you know, and I don't know how many of you all listening know where I am, but I am in Atlanta. I am in, near and in the heart of where the violence happened in the Asian spas here, like in the Norcross and Alpharetta, North Atlanta area. And it struck me, and it struck me for many reasons, which we'll talk a little bit about today. But what really, you know, for me hit me is that there needs to be conversation between the Black and brown community and the Asian community, and to begin to unearth some of the challenges we face within our communities of color. And so I invited a colleague on today, Dr. Jenny Lau, and we're gonna have a conversation about this. So welcome, Dr. Jenny, to the show. And I really do appreciate you coming on because this is a sensitive topic. It's a sensitive conversation, but I think it's necessary because I think that, we have to begin to come together as communities of color and stand for each other. And it starts with having, sometimes uncomfortable conversations like this, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think throughout all of this, I've finally come to realize that you really can't sit with your thoughts and just ruminate. And you have to start talking about this to other people. For me, at least, it's something that really heals me is to
Mhm.
share. And
Yeah.
so I'm glad that we had that conversation and am having a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We've had a couple of conversations. We've had a conversation before this, which led to this. And, I want to start by having you introduce yourself, like, so that people get a context of who you are, where you're located in the US. So, and what's been your experience, having seen this from where you are and having related to the experience.
Right. Well, my name is Jenny Lau. I'm an optometrist at the Mayo Clinic Health Systems here in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. So I'm actually originally from Canada. I'm here with a working visa right now. But yeah, Eau Claire is a smaller town, I should say. I don't know if I would necessarily call it a city, but it's a smaller town in Wisconsin, and majority of the people here are Caucasian. I very, very little here are Asian or even African American here. So, um, during my experience through all of this, really hit me hard because one, I live alone. I am a very, very visible minority in my community here. And when I heard about the Atlanta shootings, it I was really in fear the day after. I felt like I couldn't go outside my apartment. I was just thinking of all these thoughts where, I had an incident where I thought I was being followed. These were the type of moments that led me to think and made me feel very paranoid about every single little thing that I would do in my daily life.
Mhm.
So that's what really started it all was, I was aware of all the other previous Asian hate crimes that were going on prior to Atlanta. But
Mhm.
when the Atlanta shooting came along, I don't know what it was. It's just something that was just so shocking to me in a sense that, these people were going to work like any other day, and all of a sudden they weren't coming home.
Right.
It's just the severity of that crime just seems so much more real to me.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Because it was, I think, it's seemingly, unprovoked. I want to say seemingly random, but not random in the way that it's untargeted,
Right.
right? but
Right.
random in the way that you just like comes out of nowhere,
Right.
like nobody sees it coming,
Absolutely.
and especially for me, like especially in Atlanta, because
Mm,
we haven't really, we're such a diverse city,
absolutely.
right? Like I drive down the street and I'm going through, the Latinx community, and you drive up Beaufort Highway and you'll go through Little Korea and Little Vietnam, and there's like just Little India. You go over into Decatur, and then like there's all these places, right? Like Chinatown and Japantown, and there's like all of these places in Atlanta, and people know, and we know where everyone is, and I even I frequent some of the Korean spas, um, just on a regular. Well, I used to, but pre-pandemic, of course, I used to go like a couple times a month, and so for me, it was not only you know super close to home, but also it just occurs to me like, wow, in such a diverse city where it seems to be a relative camaraderie between communities of color.
Mhm.
And to be honest with you, when this whole thing started, there was something I was unaware of, and
Mhm.
that is this dynamic between Black and Asian community.
Mhm.
Um, and it was something that I was blind to, right? And probably because I'm in the community a lot, and so there's no dynamic between me and the Asian community, but there's apparently a dynamic between the Black and Asian community.
Mhm.
And so one of the things I remember in our previous conversations asking you was, had anybody reached out to you in your community? Now you're in a primarily white community,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I remember asking, well, did anybody reach out to you? And your
Yeah.
answer was,
I guess I was making it trying to make it seem like there was someone that I wanted to convince myself that someone did reach out to me.
mhm,
But what you made me realize was that actually no one reached out to me. And I think that's what really hurt the most was thinking back at the time when I felt the most vulnerable, felt the most fear.
mhm,
No one reached out, and
mhm,
I I think that's what really disappoints me in a sense of the fact that no one thought to think I would be affected by this.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. And so it's an interesting, like for me,
Mhm.
um, I was pretty surprised about that because I have a perspective like, and this isn't, and as since our last conversation, I've even had some time to think about it, right? Like, um, I've had the perspective of, well, even though Asians are, um, they're definitely communities of color. They're more. What's the? How do I want to frame it? I've had the perspective or the occurrence that you more closely identified to the white race,
Mm.
right? And so it didn't, for me, like it was also shocking because it didn't occur for me like it would have happened because like, well, you guys are like white adjacent.
Sure.
But then right.
I get what you're saying, though. No, I get what you're saying, though, because
And so it's like, well, you how is this, they're like, how is that possible?
sure.
And then to hear your perspective, especially being a visible minority in a white city, it's
Mhm.
like it's a different
Yeah,
view. It's an
and
awakening.
I totally get what you're saying because during the time of Black Lives Matter, I was in your shoes where I thought, I wasn't the one that's being targeted here. And so this whole issue with Black Lives Matter, I looked at my colleague who was Canadian, um, Black Canadian, I guess, and I immediately reached out to him because I thought, well, you probably are very affected by this. And so I reached out. And so I can understand what you're saying in a sense that if these things happen to Asians, yes, we are lighter skinned. We're closer, quote unquote, to the white Caucasian skin color. And, we may not experience as much racism as compared to Black Americans. This whole concept is actually embedded in things like the coined term model minority. Asians are a model
Mm-hmm.
minority, and
Mm-hmm.
that Asians cannot feel a sense of racism that other people do, or that we
Right.
we don't feel like things are unfair, we and all that kind of stuff. And it's not true. It's really
Yeah.
not true. That really divides us as Asians and Black people in
Yeah.
general.
Absolutely. I think that's, it's so interesting because what I get out of it is that the racism looks different, right? And then from our perspective, because it's like because y- the Asian community is that has that whiter skin, and then Asians were sort of, yeah, like you said, deemed the model minority, picked, and they're doing much better in certain academics, and like they're hand picked, but it's all a setup. It's such a setup inside of white supremacy culture, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's the thing that um, we as minorities need to begin to realize, because let's be real. I am quite sure that there has been, perpetuation of this inside of our communities, between the Asian and the Black communities. The divide has been perpetuated, not really understanding and knowing that we're being puppeted in a sense,
Yeah.
you know because I mean, I can tell you from our community, one of the sensitive points is, why do Asians own all the Black hair care stores? Like, that's a thing for us. Like, what is up with that? you know like, but there's a conversation in our community, right? It's a normal thing. And so we begin to look at, well, what's that about? And when there is um, racism, like profiling that happens in a Black hair care store by an Asian person to a Black person, it's like, how, why, how are you going to do that? So there's this we perpetuate, both sides perpetuates the divide
Yeah.
by not recognizing that, in a sense, it's a setup. So then the question becomes, well, how do we start to heal that?
I mean, I think the first thing is really to discuss it, is to talk
Hmm.
about it, point it out, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's really hard for people to understand because it's so deeply embedded in our minds, in our actions, in
Hmm.
our words.
Hmm.
It's inter intertwined in everything that we do. And so
Hmm.
what we should start doing right now is really to be able to point it out. And
Yeah.
I think these two events, the Asian hate crimes of 2021, even back in 2020, as well
Hmm.
as the Black Lives Matter events, these two things should already have woken us up to the
Hmm.
fact that it is not a matter of exclusively Asians. It's
Hmm.
not a matter of exclusively Black Americans. This
Hmm.
is a
Hmm.
matter of all minorities and persons of
Hmm.
color.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that once we start to recognize this whole concept of the model minority, I really love that you brought that up. Then we can really get rid of that and say, no, there is no model minority. If you look at, I saw this video of, and I cannot remember this politician's name. He's an Asian politician who
Mhm.
was speaking out um, against, around the Asian hate crimes. And he showed this like scar. He had served in the US military, he had served, in the military for 20 years and retired. But he talks about how when he first came here, how he was, beaten, and, he was, bullied. And I think like the first generation immigrants from, you know, Asia and, Southeast Asia, Far East Asia, like all of these cultures come in, and they come in um, with a vision for a better life for,
Mhm.
their next generation, but they endure some of the same types of um, racist acts, hate crimes. It's just that Black people have been enduring it over and over and over for the last 400 years. So it makes us a little bit more sensitive to it, right? And as
Absolutely.
we should be, right? Not diminishing that at all, as we should
Yeah.
be. And so we have to look at how it looks different. In NLP, there's this concept called model of the world. And what happens is when we're not willing to look at and step into another's model of the world, then we separate ourselves. We're separating ourselves from another person.
Mhm.
And I think that's what we can start doing, is like really looking at, from a different perspective. The racism may look different or may occur differently, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't look differently when you have a man come in and shoot up 3 Asian spas. That doesn't look differently from, from a life and death perspective,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
But from a what it occurs like from a Black person's perspective, and from an Asian person's perspective, from an Indian person's perspective, from a Latinx person's perspective, is going to be different based on our model, based
Mhm.
on where we come from, based on what we've experienced
Yeah.
as an individual and as a culture, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting that you brought that up because, yes, I think that's very true that we all have different experiences of racism because of our backgrounds, because of our
Mhm.
histories. You know, Black Americans definitely have gone through so much, so many years of this. It's embedded into American history.
Mhm.
Um, Asian Americans, I'm not a historian here, but I'm sure Asian Americans haven't experienced it as long, perhaps. And uh, it isn't interesting to see in your perspective when we had shared each other's stories. The last conversation we had was how you dealt with racism and how I dealt with racism.
Mhm.
And what I saw in you actually was when we were talking, it looked like you had so much strength that had to be built in order for
Mhm.
you to deal with this for many generations. And I could see that in you. That gave me so much more understanding and um, empathy in
Mhm.
what you guys had to go through,
Thank
because
you.
it amazes me the time that when we're having that conversation, I myself felt very saddened, angered,
Mhm.
during all these times. But when I had talked to you about your experience, I really truly did see the lifts and bounds that you had to go through to get to a place where you're at now in order
Mhm.
to give me the advice that I have experienced, and
Yeah.
I can't explain it any better than just trying to remember in my head and how I saw that in you. But I
Mm.
hope you do know that I really acknowledge the strength that you and your people have uh, because of all this stuff that's going on.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it is, it's an interesting thing, because we get it from a very young age. We know,
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
learn it from a very young age.
Yeah.
When you have um when you walk out in the street, especially now, I grew up in Alabama, so when you walk out in the street and you
Mhm.
hear that N word very young, when you are questioned about your behavior, when you're questioned about your intelligence, when you're questioned, like, it's just something that And it's a sad thing that we have to get used to, but it's just something that you sometimes are not even taught by parents. It's not something that like your parent says you're going to be treated differently. It's just that you experience it and you're like, oh, okay, got it. And then maybe the conversation comes later, but and for little Black boys, I think it's even more stark, right?
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. And I think that, some, it takes a, I think it takes a level of maturity, and especially in the Black and Brown community, I think it takes a level of maturity to come away from, you know, where where were all of the other people standing for us for Black Lives Matter to be able to stand in solidarity, and that's a conversation I have been having with a colleague, a sister colleague of mine, who, when all of this happened with the Asian community, you, a I would say, I will speak for myself and people that a certain amount of people that I talk to went through a plethora of emotions, right?
Mhm.
It wasn't that, it's like there's an inner conflict that happens, right? So we want to stand for our minority brothers and sisters, and then there's an internal, well, you know we are going to stand for them, even though, and not saying that no one did, I'm just saying we're going to stand for those, even those who did not stand for us. Because I
Mhm.
can tell you, an interesting story, and this is where we have to begin to tease out and separate, um, in the individuals, right? So it's like sometimes we're like, one Asian is all Asians, one Black is all Black, right?
Mhm.
One brown person is all brown people, and this is where we have to begin to have the maturity to tease this out. So during the right after the events with George Floyd, um, my yoga community, pulled together, and they're like, surrounding me with love, and I really appreciated that. And they were, what can we do? And there was one um, one Asian yogi, and she was just like, I can't deal with this. I have my own racism and to deal with it. And I was just like, she posted this and I was like, wow, like it was how quickly that she made it about herself. And so, I reached out to her personally, and
Mhm.
I was like, I really get that as women of color, we all experience racism. And
Yeah.
this right now is not about that. This is about standing in solidarity for this Black
Mhm.
man that got slain in the street, the Black woman got slain at her home the month before that, and the Black man who was running in Georgia and got chased down and shot with a shotgun.
Mhm.
And she responded to me, "You don't know me," and proceeded to, like, spit out this stuff of, her story. And it was hurtful because I was like, wow, like she's a woman of color too,
Yeah.
right? And so then this is where, like, the perpetuation of the divide happens in these little individual. So when this happened, like, it immediately re-traumatized me in a way from that. And then I had
Absolutely.
to like pull up and be
Yeah.
like, no, because not everyone is her,
Mhm.
you know like one of my closest friends, um who happens to be the owner of the yoga studio, she's Korean.
Yeah.
And so, like, like, this, not everybody is her. And so in our community, in the Black community, in the Asian community, we have to be looking at, not everyone is that person that you
Yeah.
had, if you had a bad experience with, that you had that bad experience with. And we have to begin to tease that out and really be like, okay, let's heal this,
Right. Yeah, and that's
right?
that's very true, and that's something I have to remind myself all the time is that, I hear the news, oh, this Asian woman was attacked by a Black man, and it's
Hmm.
hard for me as an Asian person to think, okay, it's just that individual.
Yeah.
It's not, I'm not going to coin it on all Black people. It's
Hmm.
hard. And I
Hmm.
think anybody in that situation would find that hard too. And
Hmm.
yes, that is very true that we cannot kind of umbrella these types of people to think all Black people or all white people.
Mhm.
are enemies of us, right?
Mhm.
It's interesting, you know, when you said that person um, didn't want to support you. It kind of makes me wonder, well, what's going through her head to make her feel that way?
Mhm.
And I think that's definitely a conversation that's worthwhile to look into too, is what made her feel that your pain was not equal to her pain.
Right. Right. I mean, something we'll never know
Right.
if she's unwilling to have that conversation. And
Maybe
it's
she was having a
and but
bad day.
I don't know, I don't know. All I can say is that, I was able to just, it's like, okay, that hurt.
Oh,
It hurt.
absolutely.
And um it, then I had to remember for me, my training, which is okay, that's her stuff, not me, right? Her
Yeah.
model the world, her stuff. And I am going to protect my spirit by, like moving past that,
Mhm.
and then, allowing myself to feel all of the emotions that I felt when all of this happened, like the pain for you all, the pain for myself, the pain for the anger of white supremacy culture, the
Yeah.
um the conflict, and to speak it out. I think that's probably the biggest thing that we don't do is we don't talk about it. We don't
Mhm.
talk about it, but we don't talk about it in a way, we don't talk about it as a form of solution,
Yeah.
right? We,
Absolutely.
we talk about it for like who's right and who's
Mhm.
wrong,
Mhm.
who's better and who's worse, who's more oppressed, who's the model minority, who we talk about it in a very binary way and not in a way to forward a conversation for, okay, this is how I'm feeling. Like the conversation we had before, which is this is how I'm feeling. But you know what? I can choose to stand in a different shoe and see how it might look from that perspective.
Yeah.
You know, there's a little I know I talk a lot about NLP, but there's a little exercise I do in my trainings my anti-racism trainings that I do with my partner, Dr. Jill, and it's called perceptual positions. And in that exercise, you first associate or step into your own body and you feel all of the feelings, the emotions, the words, all of those things that you would feel in your own body. Then you pop out of your own body and it's like a triangle, right? So it's like this triangle. Then you pop out of your body and you walk into the other person's shoes.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you're looking back at yourself and you're literally embodying the potential emotions, the potential feelings and thoughts and words, and receiving whatever might be coming from what would be your body, and you're imagining that this is happening, right? And it feels so different when you do that. Like you literally allow yourself to embody someone else's shoes for a moment, and then you can kind of get wow, and then you pop out of that second position. And then you go into what's called the observer position, which is the peak of the triangle.
Mhm.
And you can look down on both parties and you can
Mhm.
see a different perspective. And it's super powerful because when in this circumstance, if you were to do that, Black community, Asian community, and then the observer community, you can clearly see, well, yeah, I can see both sides of it, but what's the bigger picture? What is
Mhm.
the bigger picture?
Yeah.
And so, I think one of the things we can do is to start to look from these different perspectives, but especially from the observer perspective, so that we can see the bigger picture, and
That's
that'll lead us to the solution.
absolutely, that's a great summary.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think this is a work in progress. Um, I am so appreciative of you having this conversation with me because I think that these kind of conversations are a step in the right direction to have people think of different perspectives. And what I can say about the listeners, or for the listeners or to the listeners, is if you're resisting in the conversation, if you're resisting the compassion, if you're resisting, you know, it all, just allow yourself to dig into the why. If it is it pain? Is it because a lot of times that resistance is due to pain or hurt or anger or some emotion. And what I want to say is it's okay to feel the emotion and don't let the emotion run you.
Yeah.
When there's a bigger picture, and it's going to take a lot of maturity on the parts of both of our sides to
Mhm.
lay down our swords against each other and to come together for the greater, which the greater fight, which is that um, dismantling of white supremacy culture, that decolonizing of white supremacy thinking and mindset.
Mhm. Absolutely. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for letting me share my thoughts on this. It really does help me heal during this time. So, and I'm very, very glad
Yeah,
that I
it's
have.
my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And I appreciate you being, the courageousness that it takes to come on and speak and share authentically and share so vulnerably. I really do appreciate that as well.
Thank
So
you.
I wanna if you have like a social media, is there anything that you want to share, like a social media platform or blog or anything like that you want to have for people to follow you?
My social media on Instagram is the Gen Spirit. And I also do art on Instagram. So it's
Yay.
underscore is art on Instagram.
It's art. Oh, I gotta follow you on that. I don't know. I don't know that I knew. I knew that you did art, but I didn't know that you had an Instagram account for art.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah.
just
So the
made
Gen
it
Spirit.
separate. Yeah,
Yay! That's super cool. So the
thank
Gen
you.
Spirit and it's underscore art.
Underscore is art.
Oh, underscore is art. Okay, underscore is art. And we'll make sure we put that in the show notes.
Yeah,
And thank you so much for just, for being here.
thank you. I
All
appreciate you.
right, y'all. Of course. So, this is a deep conversation, and I will say that, this is a conversation that will probably be ongoing. I'll have another guest on, and we're going to continue to heal the divide between our communities, not just the Black and Asian community, but the Latinx, and if there's any, like all of these communities of color, we have to be coming together. And so we just think about that. As always, I like to thank the listeners because without the listeners, there is no podcast. And so if you like this podcast, we appreciate a little comment, a little review so that the people listening afterwards know that they can have a difference made in their lives by listening. And with that, we shall see you on the next podcast. You all have a great rest of the day, a great rest of the week, and you all stay safe out there. Namaste.